The other day I ordered up myself a custom switch panel, and when I got it in, it didn't come with any instructions, so I figured this might be a good opportunity to show you guys how to hook it up, because I kind of already have a pretty good idea what I'm doing. And since the panel says right on it for racing only, my race car today is going to be a 1997 F-150. Because we follow the rules here at Strange Garage. So the actual reason that I need the switch panel on my truck is because before I bought it, there was significant damage done to the steering column. So I'm not able to start it with the key. I have to use the switch that's underneath the dashboard, and I would really like to get rid of that. In an ideal world, the way I would figure out how to wire this up, I would use a wiring diagram. Unfortunately, those are like tender profiles, and if you find a good one, it's probably too good to be true 9 times out of 10. And so before I start the diagnostic process, I'm going to explain a little bit about how the wiring in a truck works, and then we'll go from there. So if you're dealing with house wiring, pretty much any switch is going to have 3 wires coming into it. We're not going to get into that exactly how it works, but it's not the best setup. It's just a lot of wire that you have to run to get anything done in a house. Fortunately, cars, they run off a little bit different kind of electricity, and so whoever figured this out is an absolute genius. So he figured out that since the whole car is made out of metal, you're able to just hook the negative to the car itself, and you just have to run the positive wire to wherever you need the power. So for this light bulb, you just have to run the positive here, and you can literally get the negative off of any metal surface on the car. And so if I'm being vague as to where I'm getting my ground from, it's because you can pretty much get it from absolutely anywhere you want. And I'm going to be really specific about when and where we use grounds, because just about everything we're using is going to be a hot, so you won't really need a ground. Using the multimeter, I put the negative lead on an adequate ground, and then I put the positive lead directly into the switch terminals, and I knew it was live if I was able to get about 12.5 volts with the multimeter set to 20 volts DC. I drew up a quick reference diagram, and I indicated on that diagram which wires I already knew were hot. After that, I flipped the switch into the on position, and so this would be making contact with most of the switches. At this stage, I switched the multimeter over to ohms, and I put the positive terminal directly into the wires that I already knew were hot, and then I used the other terminal to determine which wires I had continuity with. And you know you have continuity if you get any indication of ohms, because otherwise it wouldn't be making any connection at all. If you have any continuity at all between wires, then you know that the switch is making contact, and then that means we have to make contact with our switch panel that we're adding. Once I thought I had a pretty good grasp of how the wiring was supposed to go inside the truck, I thought I would take the time to kind of scratch something off the bucket list there and hot wire my truck. I know it might not count since it belongs to me, but it's still pretty cool. Not bad. So when you turn the key, although it seems kind of like it's one thing happening, it's actually 4 separate functions happening all at the exact same time, 4 different switches. So one of them is the ignition, which is just turning on your fuel and your spark so your vehicle can run. Another one is the actual starter relay, which cranks only when it's starting and then turns off after you take the pressure off of the key. Accessories, which in this case are the radio, the heater fan, and then the other accessories, which are the wipers and blinkers. So it's 4 switches, but it's all happening at pretty much the same time. And I'm not really going to change any of that. I'm just going to do it slightly differently. Instead of using 4, I'm going to use 3 switches. The hots are kind of irrelevant, but I'm going to keep them the same as they are right now. But I'm going to hook up the ignition as 1, so that's going to be the first switch. The push button is going to be the starter, obviously. And then I'm going to have 3 circuits plugged into 2 hots, which isn't exactly a problem. As long as the hots are on the exact same side as each other, it's not going to be an issue. So like I said, it's the same exact thing. I'm just doing it slightly differently. 3 switches instead of 4. So the way I'm going to do it, or the way I have to do it with this particular one, so the first switch has a light in it. And the light comes on automatically as soon as you flip the switch. So we have to have a hot and a ground for inputs. That's really critical. As soon as I hit the switch, there's going to be power out, and there's 2 things we need to do with that. One of them, we need to go out to where it's supposed to go, to the ignition, but we have to have another hot coming down to go to this light here. And we have to do the same thing with the ground. So the ground comes in and it's got to go back out to the light. And so as soon as we flip this switch, simultaneously this light is going to come on and this light is going to come on. And that's the only thing you need the grounds for. Everything else, all these circuits here, the ground happens somewhere else. All we're doing is making the connection. So the only thing we need grounds for is these lights. So this push button has its own circuit also. So the power comes in, when you push the button, it makes that connection, and then it goes out to the starter. That's pretty simple. I know that I mentioned it briefly before, but I wanted to make this absolutely clear because this could be pretty frustrating if you get it wrong. When you're doing multiple circuits on one switch, the only thing that really matters is you need the input to be on the same side. So you want all of your hots on this side, because if you were to accidentally put one of them over here, everything on this side is going to be live and everything on this side is going to be live. And so the switch is completely irrelevant. They're all going to be live all of the time. So you might as well just make them a hard connection. So that's the point. Just make sure that you get all of your hots on one side. I purchased a button separately that I really want to be in this switch panel, so I have to go ahead and remove one of the switches that's in it already. And go figure, the button wouldn't fit, so I have to drill this out before I can add the button. Not that big of a deal, I guess. So the wiring for the lighting is just a tiny little bit different than the wiring for everything else. The rest of the components to the truck are just making connections. This requires an actual circuit to happen inside of here, so all that really means is you need a hot and you need a ground. And so the ground are blue here, so this is the ground that came from our donor battery here. So the ground goes from here, it jumps to here, and then it jumps to here. So every light needs its own ground, and then it's the same for the hot. So we have the hot post that comes to here, and then when you flick the switch, it actually goes from here and it goes across all the lights. So when you flip the switch, it bridges that gap, makes the connection. Pretty sweet. So the way the original switch panel was wired up, everything was really just making connections, which is all DC really is. It's pretty simple stuff. And so since we had individual circuits where they're each making one connection, I ran whites together, greens together, and blacks together. And the reason I did that is so at the other end, when I go to wire everything up, each circuit has its own color. It's going to make everything super simple. And it looks like it's a jumbled mess. Well, I mean, it kind of is, but there's reason behind it, and I already showed you guys how to wire up the lights, and so I just piggybacked the light power with everything else, and it should all work pretty well. While you'd probably think that my main motivation for hooking all this up was related to the fact that I couldn't use my key, that wasn't the actual reason. The whole point of me mounting the switch panel was I just really wanted somewhere to mount this button. And so that's what I put there, and it's about the best place to mount that button. Yeah, I know that some of you guys are probably going to make fun of the whole plywood panel that I made to trim everything out, which is reasonable. I mean, it's pretty funky, but the whole point of me doing this wasn't for use. I mean, I'm going to use these eventually, but I'm not going to use this actual panel. The whole reason I even bought this is because I wanted these switches, and for me to buy these switches, it was actually more expensive than for me to buy the panel. So that's the route that I went. This button came separately, but that's just for the horn. That's my special little guy. Got a soft spot for that horn, man, let me tell you what. But I wanted to show you guys how to do this, and hopefully I did that. If you have any questions, feel free to comment. And if you like the video, just go ahead and like it and subscribe maybe. Anyway, thanks for doing your part to help make this world a strange place, guys.